What is up, everyone, and welcome to Drop In, where we have open, authentic conversations about all things mental health, including modern dating.
Woo.
We are here with my right-hand woman, Dr. Jackie, licensed psychologist, coolest person in the uni. I'm very biased.
Hey, friends.
Thanks so much for coming on the pod, finally.
Thanks for finally having me.
Our people had to talk to each other to negotiate.
There was a lot of behind the scenes negotiation for this. I had to walk all of 20 feet to get from my office to your office.
To travel to make this happen. No, after years of not having the podcast, it's good to be back. I appreciate all your help. The tech work behind the scenes.
Which I had 0.0% of help in.
Everything we had to do, but you know what? We're making it work to have this first conversation. Something that we talk a lot about as two psychologists out here treating lots of different people, but talking about modern dating. How often does this come up in your sessions?
Constantly. All the time. That is probably one of the top topics of conversation. So I'm curious about you.
Yeah, people want to get out there and meet other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for the sake of this conversation. People date for a lot of different reasons.
Sure.
Some people are looking for monogamy, for that, one serious relationship. Other people aren't. All forms of dating exist, but the important thing is people talk about this in therapy.
Oh, yeah.
You're putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, trying to meet others and connect in this era that we know we're in this huge period of isolation.
Absolutely. I think that is probably the most common trend that I've seen across most of my clients is this feeling of isolation, especially post-COVID. And I think I see that even within friends, family, colleagues, even we talk about this, feeling really isolated sometimes, working from home or not having the same social experiences that we used to have post-COVID, which part of that is really helpful, right? Like we have access to way more healthcare, way more community groups online, things along those lines. But there's also the flip side of that where we are very much online primarily now. So I think that's something that I've noticed for sure post-COVID.
We are in 60% of 19 to 29-year-olds will participate in online and app dating.
Thank you, Encyclopedia Justin.
Boom. We bring the stats on this pod, not just opinions. Stats included. Got to do our research and look it up. But you see a sort of a decline depending on the age, like our age group going up to 39. I think it was just over half of people. But people are getting on the apps.
Mm-hmm.
People are using the apps.
Do you remember when the apps came out?
I don't know if I know right when they came out, but I remember when they gained momentum.
Yes.
Like there was the phase of you're doing online dating, like judgment.
Yes.
Critical.
Yes.
Like, why would you do that?
Right.
And then there was all of a sudden this thing of like, this is going to be the new norm.
Yes. Yeah, it is wild because I remember it was before I had moved down to Florida. So that was 2015 when I moved down. And I remember the ones back in the day, I guess, right? We had like the real true online like Match. Do you remember Plenty of Fish?
Plenty of Fish. That was one of the first ones that came to my mind.
Yeah, I think that was the first one that I can remember back to, but it was still kind of taboo when that first kind of came on the scene. And then once I got down here in 2015, I feel like it was very normal that people were like on Tinder. And I think Hinge and Bumble came out after that. And it just felt so much more normalized and accepted that everyone was on the apps.
Just from a sheer data perspective of meaning if you're single and you want to meet other single people, just like social media and whatever, if you want to share a talent or share a picture and you want the most people to see it, it's like this is how technology is. And yet, I don't know what your conversations are like with your clients, but people don't like the apps,
Yeah.
but they're on the apps.
Yeah, I would say there are mixed reviews, but I think the common theme that I keep hearing is this feeling of burnout, essentially, from the apps and frustration. And I think the frustration comes from multiple places, whether that be this feeling of, I just don't understand how to hack this system, or I feel like the algorithm of dating apps is just not working for me, or I'm doing something wrong, or I haven't quite figured this out yet. And I think there are also the other challenges in terms of, I'm taking this really seriously in terms of my dating being really intentional and looking for a partner, and feeling like other people might not necessarily have that same intention, or there just aren't the right people out there for me, et cetera, et cetera. What's been your experience in terms of clients, friends, all the above?
I think it's just something we all complain about.
Yeah.
That you spend so many hours on this algorithm that you start to lose touch with, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like the swiping can get sort of like mind numbing in a lot of ways. And I know for men, which again, looking at the data, around like 2 to 10% of men will get like 0 matches.
Yeah.
Or like hardly ever get a match. And sort of the opposite is true for women. Women get a match usually in a third of people they swipe on. So you're getting almost inundated, or can be inundated.
That's so fascinating to hear those stats. That is just such a different ratio for men versus women.
And it at least matches the conversations I'm having with my single friends and my clients. Like the overall is men are sort of like, when I get a match, and again, we're referring to, straight couples here, but like when I get a match, that it's like, oh my gosh, like finally.
Yeah.
And on the opposite end, it's like women are like, there's just so many. Like there could be so many matches. Like, how do I be more selective with all these matches I have?
Right. Or they're getting matches, but they're not thrilled with the potential suitors. Or how do I discern which one is dateable and which one might not be dateable?
Yeah, and it makes me want to lean in and kind of talk about that of like, how can we do this better? But I think it's first important to validate like the why we do this is like it increases the likelihood of us knowing who's single, where are they, but also zeroing in. Like we know majority of LGBTQ plus individuals, more so than straight people, will find their match online or through apps. It makes sense.
Right.
Like especially in any sort of, preferences, specificities you have, when you're just out and about at the grocery store, you don't know if that person's single.
Right.
You don't know if that person has the same religious view of you or whatever. Online theoretically helps you narrow in and be more specific of like, here's 20 people that match my, preferences, which is a whole nother thing we can talk about of like, does that equate to a good match for you or not?
Right.
But at least in theory, it makes sense versus you just being, at the grocery store and you don't even know who's single.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I was listening to something the other day where it was talking about the difference between how dating used to be in person and being really limited by the amount of people just within your area, especially in places that are not highly populated.
Gosh.
You only had, in a city of, let's say, 500 people, you only have 20 people that are of similar age or single or whatever to choose from. And so I think the expectations were a bit different. The things that people were looking for or potentially okay with versus now potentially feeling more selective because we have a wider net that we're casting. So there are a lot of differences. And I feel like our generation is one of the standout ones where we had both experiences, or a lot of us have had both experiences of either dating before online profiles and apps and all of that versus now the apps being so normalized. But it is really interesting because it does very much cast a much wider net, which is great because then you can narrow in on things that are really important to you and these value overlaps. And at the same time, because you're casting a wider net, there's a lot more options, and that can get overwhelming in a different way.
Choice anxiety is real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why restaurants and places can narrow in the focus of like, these are your only options here. But yeah, I do think about that. Like the family connected you. And of course, there's cultures and backgrounds where that's still the norm and
Sure.
is the family sort of connects you in that way. But it is interesting of like, people overall don't enjoy the app experience. And I think you're hitting on a point of like feeling like you have so many options. Is it really allowing us to collect experiences versus us honing in on specific things that we think matter, but may not matter in the dynamic when we're actually face to face interacting, having conversation?
Right. And I think it also brings up the other aspect of the online dating experience versus in person. Like how many of these matches are potentially going to a date and then having that experience or getting past a first date or whatever? Because I feel like a lot of times, especially from what I'm hearing from clients and friends and family, that people will talk on the apps or they'll match and then either it'll fizzle out or it'll ghost in some way, shape, or form, and it won't even go to a date necessarily. So there's also does the online profile translate to a dating experience and what you actually see in person and experience in person?
This is why I feel like the goal should always be to get off the app. And I think because of social anxiety, because of a lot of belief around, I don't want to be wasting time, you try to gather too much information in that little chat box,
Right.
you know, on Hinge or Tinder or Bumble or wherever, where I tell clients and I explore of like, have you ever met somebody who, when you text them, you're like, I want to strangle you. Like you are a terrible texter, but then you hang out with them in person and they're incredible. And you're like, yo, this person doesn't show up via text.
I'd like to think that I am one of those people.
Babe, you're a terrible texter.
I am an awful texter, but I would like to think that I'm incredible when I show up.
You don't use enough emojis. I need more emojis from you if I'm giving you feedback.
Honestly, you're lucky if you get a response from me because I tend to forget.
ADHD queen over here, and we love her for it. But I think that is something to reflect on. Listen, all of us, nobody's time is not valuable. Like that is true. But this idea that I'm going to know enough via this text box versus like, yeah, you have the little back and forth, which we can get into because men often say in therapy, what am I supposed to say? Which I'd like to get your take on. But I still think you can't equate how someone communicates completely in that little box to how the match might be in real life.
Totally agree.
What should men say? What up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I feel like I also have a similar conversation with a lot of my male clients and friends because there might not necessarily be a lot to go off of on a profile. And I think there's always the fear of, am I being boring? Am I being another number to this person? Am I being creepy if I say that this person looks beautiful in a picture? Am I all the potential what ifs, right? And the challenge is, how do I stand out? And that would always be my suggestion, is to potentially find a prompt or something that is a bit more nuanced or specific about that person's profile and latch onto that and try to find something that's interesting about that or ask a question that would then prompt a follow-up as opposed
Something.
to, hey.
What up? Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Hinge does a pretty good job at that with the prompts and other sort of dating apps, or sort of going that way to give people the lead in. And I agree. Like, there can be the stress of like, what do I even say? I think one thing that's real important in creating like a better dating experience is to be clear on what the hell you're looking for.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, if you want something casual and hook up, great. I think we're at this point, especially in society, whatever you want, there's a match out there for you.
Right.
I think the coyness and sort of the bait and switch is what I hear a lot from, some of my single women daters, but from people in general, of like people not being clear, or even if they're like, hey, I'm not quite sure, I'm just looking to meet people. I think the thing you get stuck in is where like, oh, they said they're not really looking for something casual. I want a relationship, and we're going on a 4th hangout date. And I'm like, this is not going to end well.
Right.
You're not matching on what this is from the jump.
Right. Yeah. And I think the challenge a lot of times too is that people might not necessarily know that, or they might say that I want a relationship, or I want that eventually, but might also
the eventually hook is just
but
classic.
Then once they're presented with all of these options, they're kind of being selective, and they're like, okay, I'm going to date around a little bit until I find this unicorn in the rough, which is its own challenge.
And I think there's some bit of truth in there that I get. Is like, the intensity slides the other way, where people are like coming in of like, almost like, you have to know whether you want to be with me, and we're meeting on a second date. It's like, wait a minute. There has to be the energy exchange, feel each other out, hang out with each other in different places, contexts.
Right.
For most of us, before we really know. But it does feel different. And this is where I think a lot of criticism falls on men in this regard, of like being so coy, where you might tell your boys or tell someone else, nah, I'm not really looking for a relationship. Then why are you going on this 4th date with someone that is looking for a relationship? That's where it's like, don't set yourself up like that.
Right. And I think that's where people sometimes get a bad name for themselves, or now there's these websites that I did not know existed until one of my clients told me that there are websites of like, are we dating the same person? And you can look that up. And I was shocked by that one. That one was super interesting to me.
I think good. Like, listen, there's no perfect person. So sometimes like we're all flawed as humans and whatever, but I'm also like, you're putting yourself out there. If you think you could do this in the modern era, to be like sort of a serial dater and string a lot of people along, that, again, which is a whole question of self, of like, how many people could you be casually dating at a time? And some people don't, meaning they're like, one person, so many dates, not interested, one person.
Well, and I think that's the nuance of what dating means to each person. And I think that looks different depending on who you are and what it is that you're trying to do in terms of your intentions and what feels right for you. Because casual dating for one person might be, I'm dating multiple people, or I'm sleeping with multiple people. And for someone else, it might be, I'm going on one date, or I'm focusing on one person at a time, and then I'm trying to figure out if I like that person. I think there's also this other huge aspect of where you're located. Are you in a big city? What is the culture of where you're living? And I think that plays a huge role in terms of what dating looks like for people as well.
Oh my, absolutely. And this is something we talk about all the time.
Yes.
I grew up in Ohio. People got into relationships.
Yes.
And granted, it was a different era and all this, like into the early 2000s. So times changed. Shout out to Ohio. Report back if you've changed. But we live in South Florida.
Yes.
South Florida, book a trip down. We love Miami. It's our favorite city. We're biased. We like to have a good time. But South Florida is really casual.
Yes.
The people like to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Party, party, party.
Yes. It is not necessarily a relationship culture down here. We are very much known for hookup casual culture.
Which, again, no judgment.
No.
But it's naming what it is.
Right.
Also lived in Alabama for 4 years.
Yeah.
Alabama's its own culture. Felt even a little bit more lean towards like we're heading towards marriage.
Right.
Like not just we're together, which often felt like Ohio, like you get in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But in Alabama, it felt like people move to marriage so fast.
Right.
Like I've never lived in a culture where that was the experience.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because for me, I've lived primarily in or around bigger cities. Growing up on Long Island, I mean, again, this was also like pre-apps. So things have changed, I'm sure, in some regards, but there is much more of a cultural influence of being together and having like the family aspect and family dynamic. And then living here versus living in Denver as well, all big cities, bigger cultures in terms of that diversity. But there were a lot of options everywhere that I've lived, and dating was very known everywhere that I've lived. It was never that, you know, you had a small amount of people in a certain place and everyone is trying to just look for an immediate person to marry necessarily. But I noticed this with clients that are all over the country, depending on if they're in more rural, suburban areas versus in cities. And I've seen this a lot when it came to the dating shows that I was working on as well, that there were a lot of similarities in terms of the dating trends overall. But what was different was each person, or each place, I should say, had a different dating culture or different challenges. So I can remember when I was working in Nashville, a lot of them talked about how the culture there was a lot of transient people, like people coming for vacations, and they weren't necessarily there for more than a week. So am I going on a date with someone who's only here for vacation? Or am I finding people who actually live here? So that one always stood out to me in terms of the dating culture is just different depending on your geographic location.
Absolutely. And it makes you feel for people that kind of feel like the mismatch in any direction. Like you live in maybe a more conservative place where everyone's jumping into marriage and you don't want that or see that for you.
Right.
You live in South Florida where things are much more casual and you want something serious and steady and long term. But it's important to evaluate. It's not saying like everyone has the luxury to snap your fingers and move.
Right.
But I'm with you of like the culture of a place dictates the dating culture for sure.
Totally.
And that, again, even on the apps and what you're looking for of like, you might be swiping a lot to find someone that matches.
Right. And I think it's challenging too, because especially for people who are living in areas that don't necessarily fit with what it is that they're looking for, or even certain values, right? So I am thinking a lot about my LGBTQ clients that some of them don't even necessarily feel safe dating in the places that they are living.
That's right.
And that's another really important factor that I feel like keeps a lot of people isolated or leads to the challenges in terms of dating or finding potential suitors or partners is, where am I located? Are there people that have similar values to me? Am I safe actually going out on these dates or meeting up with people? And I think that that's just another huge aspect to very much acknowledge when it comes to dating. And obviously, like, we don't necessarily have that experience as straight people. But even in terms of our clients and the people that we work with and friends that we have and coworkers and all of that, there is this huge element of, am I in a place that feels helpful or not so helpful in terms of the dating experience that I want to have.
So true. Absolutely. And it sort of points out the positive of the online is
Yes.
you can evaluate and filter a bit more than just, rolling out of the apartment and going to, a local spot nearby.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does make me think of, though, because we've talked about the apps in a lot of different ways. So many of my clients don't want to be on the app. They want to meet someone in real life. I have a take on this. We need to talk in real life meetups because it's a conversation I think that often does get neglected despite us talking about the positives of being on the app. I think the hard thing is finding a context where you sort of feel like people are here to meet someone else.
Right.
And the number one spot that comes to mind that gives that context is the bar. Meaning when you're at the bar, especially if you're there solo, it gives context of you could chat with me.
Yes.
I can't think of many times I've gone, whether it's in a restaurant or standalone bar or a bar at a club or whatever, where it's like, don't talk to this person. Like, do not come near me. Maybe I can think of a few instances, but most of the time, and this is sort of like, again, when you're dealing with sobriety and stuff, I think this is the complicated factor of the bar gives context of people mingle here. We come here to chat and say, hi, what's up? You watching the game? What are you drinking? What are you eating? Like, it gives such a easy context of versus you're at Publix, which is our grocery store. If you know, you know. If you just start a conversation with somebody, it doesn't give that context.
Right. Yeah. There is a certain intentionality, I think, in terms of the social aspect.
Right.
With bars or restaurants or the bar at a restaurant, whatever that context is. But that setting, I agree, is very much centered around people socializing.
And
meeting other people, for sure.
Other places that come to mind. Dog park.
Yes.
Dog park gives, again, I'm here, my dog, we're here.
Yes. Even other potential like sporting events and sports that you might play or kickball leagues or those types of community events, I think is another really great one. Even, I mean, sure, like people might meet at Publix or at the gym or things like that. But the thing that I always encourage people who want to date in person is being intentional about engaging in the activities that you actually enjoy, because you are much more likely to, one, be able to strike up a conversation with someone with something that you have similar interests with, and you're finding people who are enjoying the same things. And if someone is there by themselves or you're just enjoying yourself, it's kind of a win-win. Even if you don't necessarily meet someone, you're still being social and enjoying the things that you're doing.
Absolutely. And I think just in that context of like, you're enjoying this thing is way better than many of us have had the experience of like hours alone swiping in the app.
Right.
Of like, we like stand-up comedy. We're rolling to this show. It's a singles night.
Right.
You know, again, the adult kickball leagues have taken off and a lot of other offshoots. We love those as therapists.
Yes.
Like for my single clients, they're like, I signed up for, the singles volleyball. I'm like, let's go.
Yes.
You like volleyball. You're getting out. It again creates a context of like, we're here. If it's a full singles league, great. I know there could be a lot of different queer leagues and stuff. Also great for meeting friends and other people, creating connection.
Right.
Which unfortunately the apps often make us feel disconnected.
Right. And super isolated. Yeah.
Which is ironic, but that's the feeling many people have of like, this isn't working as well as we want. So then, yeah, meetups.
Run clubs
have taken off. I feel like those are become so popular.
Yeah, agreed. You won't catch me there, but for other people.
Jackie, those videos of people, they're like, I've never seen my partner run before. Jackie be damned if she's ever going to run for any reason. Even in a fire.
If you see me running, you should also be running.
Even in a fire, my only image of you is sort of walking at that brisk ADHD pace of I'm late and this happens to me every single day. You're still not running though. It's just
no, it'll be like a
pace.
brisk walk is what you'll find for me.
And you're huffing and puffing now. So that does match the run.
I'm curious about this hot take for you. I have seen a lot of people either on Instagram or on social media, or even people who I see in therapy, who ask me this question: do I need to love myself first before I start dating?
Oh, gosh. My thought is this. Could it help? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
If we move the needle from you hating yourself to you tolerating yourself, could change the way you show up to your dates.
Totally.
And go about it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're forcing me to answer that yes or no, I'm saying no.
Yeah.
And I'm saying no over and over again because you dating someone is not the same as you being by yourself. And what I mean by that is the ways you grow, cope, interact, and show up, they're not the same context.
Right.
So I think stereotypically, many people will be like, again, if you love yourself, which I agree with, expectation bias and many other things, and even confidence. And there could be many things that are great if you move the needle on that.
Sure.
But you could move the needle on that, though. Soon as you're dating someone in a relationship, all your quote demons come out and you're having to grow within the damn relationship.
Right.
We see it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're agreeing?
I agree that I don't believe that has to be a prerequisite for dating.
Gotcha.
Because I don't think anyone loves themselves, feels confident 100% of the time.
I can think of one person, but they shall not be named.
Good Lord. Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with what you're saying. I think there are very different contexts in terms of once you're in a relationship, there are a lot of different factors and patterns that come into play. And I think relationships can be really healing. They can be really helpful for us in terms of how we feel about ourselves. They can be very triggering as well, but also opportunities for potentially changing patterns. But do I think that you need to, quote unquote, love yourself before dating or before getting into a successful relationship? No. Again, I agree with what you're saying of, would it help if you feel good about yourself? For sure. Someone who exudes confidence, or there's a certain energy that I think you exude even when you're doing things that you enjoy, which is another reason why I always try to promote going to do activities or things that you feel happy about or passionate about. And that could be anything from sports to tech to Legos to games to whatever it is, gym, exercise, things that you enjoy. I think you have a different energy or presence when you're doing those things.
Absolutely. It feels aligning. It feels enjoyable. You're bringing out your best self, which again, I'm not telling people they should go to the bar, especially for a lot of different reasons that people bring up of like, I don't drink or I'm not a drinker or like this and that. You showing up to the bar, if it brings you energy, if it brings you joy, you enjoy the conversation, right? You're going to show up as your best self.
Right.
If you hate the bar and you're forcing yourself to go of like, this is a context where people chat and I meet others, it's not going to work in the same way.
Right.
Of you joining the book club, the run club, and you're like, I enjoy this. Let me see if there's singles clubs within that.
Right.
Other things that get brought up a lot in therapy is, what am I supposed to say? This is more towards the in-person. I see someone frequently at the gym. I've seen this person at the bar before. What is there a right thing to say to somebody?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as a female, it can be challenging for a male to potentially approach in certain situations or certain settings. And because you brought up the gym, there have been times that for sure I've had people come up to me and be like, hey, like, how you doing? Whatever.
Yeah, like recently. Do you not see the ring, people? Putting them on blast.
Called out. I think, again, like, there are subtle ways that you can do certain things that don't come across as intrusive, where you can, you know, say hey, wave to somebody that you see frequently at the gym or something along those lines, or even like love your shoes or something that is relatively neutral and kind of either keep it moving or allow the other person to either respond or kind of be like, oh, thanks, and move along type of thing. Whereas I think, again, like at the bar, it is a bit more like socially acceptable and understood that most people are there for socializing and for that mutual reason. So I think context and setting is very important, especially if you're, you know, a male approaching a female, but not necessarily. I think there's definitely, yeah, in those bar type settings, it's a little bit easier to either just be like, hey, like, you come here often, or is this your spot, or something that feels kind of playful, or recognizing something, again, like love your shoes, or, you know, you have a cool hat on, or something like that, that you're
In the
recognizing in the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting because even as you talk, I see you being protective of women, which I appreciate. Like you're trying to split a hair, which I think is why this gets brought up so much in therapy.
Right.
Of like, I don't want to be creepy, and at the same time, it's anxiety provoking.
Of course.
Like the shooting of the shot is anxiety provoking, and this I talk to people about this all the time. Of like, notice the body language.
Right.
And I know this is. It can be hard for some people. Some people do this instantly of like, are they making eye contact with you?
Right.
You know, are they looking at you? Have they made eye contact? It doesn't mean if they looked at you once, you shall dive in. But even if you approach and you say like, hey, how are you doing? Like, I've seen you here before, like that kind of thing. If someone's turning away from you, if someone isn't looking at you, if someone doesn't ask you any questions back.
Might be your cue to exit stage left.
Might have to just do a hi and a bye of like, enjoy your workout. You know, I hope you like that drink kind of thing.
Agreed.
And I think the thing that can play into some people is like, well, I get approached, but I have anxiety. So like I might turn away. But these are sort of the micro communications that go on in sort of the in-person approach.
Which is the challenge, I think, for a lot of people, especially neurodivergent people. There is so much in terms of the nonverbal communication and really assessing some of the nuance that I know this conversation I have so frequently with a lot of my clients who the nuance of social situations can be really difficult. And so it is really recognizing some of those micro moments or eye contact or body language and what that typically means. So again, if someone looks at you one time, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But if someone's making continuous eye contact or giving you a smile from across the room, depending on the setting or the context, that's usually a good cue that you might be able to lean in and kind of test the waters.
And I know it's hard for the ego, but I'm someone, if you approach and say hi and all the early signs are like, I think you owe yourself the pat on the back of like, again, you shot your shot. And in real life, I think we're just doing this less and less. We're so dependent on the apps. We're so dependent on technology that people will literally orbit around each other for months,
Right.
like at the gym.
Yes.
Of like, they've looked at me, I've looked at them.
Right.
And this is a part that does, I think, as a psychologist and therapist, it kind of makes me sad.
Yeah.
Of like, both of you are sort of giving each other signals, and yet there's so much pressure on this has to be such a perfect intro interaction. It's like, that doesn't exist.
Right.
And the thing I do try to tell people, again, I'm with it, of like, try to recognize boundaries, try to see if you're getting any green light signals here. And at the same time, if someone is interested, it really doesn't matter what you say.
Exactly.
If they're interested, if you're like, oh, I see you here a lot, you know, do you live in the city?
Right.
You know, like there's not a right or wrong. And I kind of feel the same if someone's not interested. Of
Right.
like, there was nothing you could have said.
No. And honestly, the thing that I very much validate, especially for men approaching women, is there are some of those like concerns about how am I coming off? How am I, you know, am I saying the exact right thing? Or if I do this one thing wrong, then it's going to ruin the entire interaction. And the reality is, from my perspective anyway, that's not the case. Like if you say something that's a little bit, I don't know, imperfect, that's never something that I would ever notice. You might be a little bit nervous coming up. That's okay. That also is probably not something that I would notice. And if I did, I'd probably be like, oh, that's sweet that this person might be a little bit nervous or a little bit uncomfortable or challenging themselves in that way. And things that I very much work on, even with a lot of my clients, are having those interactions even when it feels scary. And sometimes part of that is actually practicing that in everyday life, right? Going to coffee shops. And that's another place that you can for sure meet people, is a coffee shop. Obviously, if somebody's got headphones in or they're, you know, kind of in their own world or in a business meeting, probably not the ideal context. However, if someone's giving you, you know, the signals or eye contact or body language or whatever, that's always a great place. The thing that I would say is those are great places to practice just day-to-day interactions or challenging yourself to approach someone. And not necessarily even for the purposes of dating or necessarily connecting with someone in, you know, a way that you have to be friends or go on a date or anything like that, but just to practice that social interaction of
conversation that
it's we don't have anymore.
It's a skill. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's our fault. I just think it's reality.
Right.
Conversation is a skill that we're practicing less and less, like many other things.
Absolutely.
And again, I even feel this for people who meet on the apps. You spend all this energy all day doing your online job and whatever, and then you show up on the date and you're like, shoot. Like, human beings aren't light switches, and you got to be like, oh, tell me about your dog. Like, it's a hard transition.
Yeah.
Even for people like myself who feel very extroverted, I felt that. I felt that definitely from the pandemic. I felt like all of a sudden, like I couldn't communicate as clearly. I wasn't doing it as much.
Right. And I think it's really important to recognize that as a skill, like you're saying, because again, even with a lot of my clients, some in relationships, some dating, some, you know, all across the board, a lot of them are saying this exact same thing of, especially since the pandemic, I feel like I don't have any social skills anymore. I feel like how do I have a conversation? What do I say? What do I do with my hands? Like, no, it feels very, it feels very much like this is something that I'm kind of out of practice with.
Yeah. It's so true. I also, ironically, I've heard this from new parents before as well.
I can see that.
Like you're in such the zone of like having a newborn and all these things, not necessarily related to dating, but in just conversating and
Right.
interacting with other people. But it goes back to exactly what we're talking about. It's a skill to be
Mhm.
practiced. And when you get good at conversation, it certainly can help you in dating.
Right. And I think even in the context of going on dates, I think that is also a skill
Absolutely.
and an experience to practice. And I think a lot of times we get very attached to how well did that date go?
Mm.
Or was this the person that I'm going to marry after, the first date or the first couple of dates? And we put so much pressure on that interaction that it feels so intense. And that obviously is going to produce anxiety and make us feel, so much more pressure when we put that intensity on there. So I think even the practice of going on dates is important. And that might be an important aspect of dating is, can I go on this date and just have this experience? See how I feel about it. Is this my person? Maybe, maybe not. But how are you going to know without actually going on the date or without practicing going on dates or using that as part of the experience?
I love that because I know many people don't think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Pressures from society and judgment, and people start quoting their age, I'm this old
Mm-hmm.
and blah, blah, blah. But and it's not to minimize those things. I just don't think that helps us create connection with other people.
Yeah.
Versus you showing up, being curious about the person across from you and trying to stop that judgment of the self, of the other,
Mm-hmm.
and say, hey, can I get to know this person?
Right.
And really, I always say, like, the only question you really have to answer from first date is like, do I want to hang out with this person again?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to know if I'm going to marry this person.
Right.
And we hear those stories that people are all like, on the first date, I knew this was my person. And like, sure, we're excited for you. But do we think that's the norm? I don't think that's the norm.
I don't think so.
I think people you got to lean in. You got to collect experiences
with that person. Right.
And you're not doing that on the damn app. Get off the app, people.
We're saying that in the context of go on the date.
Go on the date. Better way to say that. I know we've covered a lot of different areas. This is sort of a different frame of the question, but I'm curious to see how you'd answer it. If you were going to give advice to your younger self who's getting into dating, based on your experiences, you're a psychologist, what piece of advice would you give them?
That's a good question. Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind for me is go for the experiences. Because I think the thing that I've learned from my own experience is I didn't know that, there were certain qualities or characteristics that I either did or did not appreciate in either partners or people that I've dated. And had I not had those experiences, I would not have gained the insight into what it is that I do like and the characteristics that I did want in a partner. So even if some of those experiences weren't always, looking back, the quote unquote perfect person for me, I still appreciate the experiences that I had, again, whether it was one date with someone or a relationship. I think it's important to be able to have those experiences to test out what it is that fits or aligns with you and what feels like maybe it doesn't. And I owe all of that insight that I gained to putting myself out there, doing things that were scary, doing things that felt uncomfortable, going out by myself sometimes, right? And going and sitting at the bar at happy hour, or just having a conversation that maybe felt a little bit scary to have or uncomfortable to have. Because if I didn't do those things, I wouldn't know now what I know about myself and about what I wanted in a partner.
It's so true. And it's interesting that I would just word it differently of like, you don't date on paper, which now sounds archaic. You don't date
On your phone.
on phone. And again, it's not to minimize, like, if you know that this variable, political, is so important, we have to be a match. Get that. Love that. If you know this religion, we have to get that. Love
Right.
that. But I think that we have taken that too far, that, and I would have thought this in my younger self of like, if we both like sports, if we both like, I'm such a sporty spice. And ironically, you are not. And
I'm just a spice.
Just a spice. No particular spice. ADHD spice.
ADHD spice for sure. I'm definitely spicy, but
Valid. But I my younger self would have thought that if we like the same things, if we would have checked the same boxes, that equates to us doing life together better. That has turned out to be unequivocally false through my history and experiences collected. That there's a dynamic, there's communication, there's connection, there's passion, there's many other things that I don't care how many boxes you checked, together, you might not have that.
Right.
You might not feel that.
Yeah.
And the amount of clients who have been surprised of, this person wasn't necessarily my type. I feel like I've heard that more than anything else.
Yeah.
And they're like, but when I'm with them, I just feel so present. I just feel connected to them.
Yes.
And adding this height preference now that these apps, I don't know if you saw that they're adding the height preference that you can sort of select. Part of me feels like that's moving the wrong direction.
Yeah. Which is challenging because I think the difficulty with apps, and this was one of the difficulties that I had with the apps when I was single and dating. And again, my experience is very limited when it came to app dating because I do tend to be a very extroverted person. I enjoy meeting people in person, going out, being social in those ways. One of the biggest challenges for me was that you are judging a person very much based on pictures or these like superficial ways that they're presenting themselves, which may or may not be an accurate representation of them, right?
Absolutely.
So you're kind of swiping through all of these things and seeing, again, someone's profile might be awful in comparison to who they are in person, or vice versa, right? Presenting yourself in this way that might not accurately represent you. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges that I found was, you don't necessarily know what someone's personality or communication style or any of those fundamental things are unless you actually get to meet them in person. So I think minimizing these or like making these requirements so specific, we're actually taking a big chunk of people that you actually might really enjoy in person and eliminating all of those options because you're narrowing the scope so intensely.
The thought that you're going to miss out on tons of people who are 1 inch shorter than what you set for. There's just something about that.
Well, what was that trend where it was like looking for a guy in finance, 6'5", like blue eyes, trust fund, whatever it was. And then someone actually did the analysis of like how many eligible people fit that scope.
I think it was 5.
I think it was literally like 5 people.
It was definitely under 10 by a lot. And I think it was like 5 humans.
Which is absolutely wild.
In some, these apps have such pros and cons. They're not going anywhere. They have so much pros for people who are looking for specific things. And the diversity elements, LGBTQ plus individuals, especially if you live somewhere that isn't a big city. I think these are the pluses. And you can be a bit more intentional if people are being honest, which Be honest off the jump. I tell people all the time, don't hide what you know to be true
Right.
about yourself in that regard. But you can explore in-person options as well.
Yeah. And practice social interactions on a regular basis so that things feel more natural if and when you do actually go on the dates, and going into dates with curiosity, being able to just show up as your authentic self and be curious about this other person and be curious about how you feel while you're with this other person.
Love that. Hey, we love you. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending your time with us. We're back.
Yes.
We're back like we never left. I don't know that that's true at all. But you know what we do appreciate? If you rate, you review, you leave us a comment. You can give us feedback.
Yeah.
I'll take
Send us your dating cues, your hot takes.
We love it all. We love it all. We love having a conversation with you all. And we really appreciate you tuning back in to drop in. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.